And welcome back, everybody, to the second half of Lecture 8, where we'll talk about some of the individual different organisms that make the Southern Ocean their home today. And now that we've gone over some ecology basics, we'll learn about some of the individual organisms at the different trophic levels. And this picture shows you some more of Antarctica's rich, diverse, and gigantic benthic or seabed-based organisms. It's not in the clip that I'm going to assign, but if you watch the entirety of the movie Encounters at the End of the World later on in this course, you will see some beautiful underwater footage showing animals like these, or like these. And I wanted to briefly show you the diversity of the creatures that live on the Antarctic seafloor. And that is only now being studied more that it's a bit safer to dive in the Southern Ocean or to dive below the ice. And now that they also have more submersible, more ROVs, remote operated vehicles that don't require people necessarily to go down to this area to observe these animals. And you have creatures like these sea spiders, sponges, sea squirts, many different crabs, lobsters, shrimp, and other crustaceans, and lots of other organisms. The seafloor of Antarctica is really teeming with life. And scientists are just now beginning to study how global warming might affect these communities because some of them live under ice shelves, and there's a chance that if the ice shelves decline, then these communities will also decline because who knows what the loss of the ice shelves could do to them. There's also concerns over how they're going to be affected by warming water, or as Antarctic bottom water forms less as a result of global warming, whether that's going to reduce the amount of nutrients that are available to deep sea animals, and that poses the possibility that these communities will decline. So yeah, these creepy crawlies are in danger of being hurt by global warming. The Antarctic giant sea spider is a really good example of polar gigantism. There's some hypotheses that they're as large as they are because they can take advantage of the large amount of oxygen in the water to grow larger. Insects and other arthropods are limited in size by the amount of available oxygen, actually. One fun fact during the Carboniferous period, in which the coal swamps existed over Antarctica, I briefly mentioned in that lecture there were giant insects, and those giant insects existed because of higher than present day oxygen levels. So the Antarctic sea spiders are actually not true spiders. They're part of their own groups called the Pinagonids, and they are arthropods technically, but they're not really spiders, nor are they crabs. They're their own little interesting group. Normally, they're really small. Normally, their legs will be about just a couple centimeters long, but the legs of the Antarctic sea spiders can get as long as 2.5 feet. Now, going back up to the pelagic levels, we learned a little bit about krill in the first half of the lecture. And the krill feed on the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton I mentioned as being the base of the food chain, and the krill, along with other zooplankton, are the herbivores or the first level consumers in the Antarctic food web. And krill are tiny shrimp. They are indeed crustaceans, part of the group that includes shrimp as well as crabs and lobsters and barnacles, funnily enough. They are tiny, but there will be millions of them present at any given time during the summer boom. And they will actually color the ocean water orange because they'll sort of swim in herds. And whales will look for the sort of dark cloud in the water to look where a bunch of krill are. And as a whole, they may be the most abundant animal on Earth by sheer biomass, at least during the summer productivity boom. There may be up to 500 million tons of them present in the Southern Ocean during the summer boom, which is astounding. They have a lot of protein and fat in them, so they are a good food source for fish, for whales, for crab eater sills, which are named not because they eat crabs, but because they eat krill, which are related to crabs, but not quite crabs. And something we'll talk about during the climate change unit is how the losses in sea ice in Antarctica have affected the krill population, because krill depend on the sea ice to breed. Now, we won't go into all of the fish in Antarctica. The fish in Antarctica largely feed on krill, or they feed on other fish that feed on the krill. And a few of the fish have unique adaptations to the cold. The famous ice fish, which are shown in the upper two pictures, are an oddity in that they mostly dwell on the sea floor, and they lack the swim bladder, which is the organ that lets fish adjust their buoyancy and lower and raise themselves up at different levels in the water. Their blood also has strangely low levels of hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is the iron compound in the blood of fish, mammals, and vertebrates, including us, that bonds oxygen. Both of these adaptations have been cited as adaptations to the cold. It's not clear what immediate advantage they have. It's a little bit mysterious still why ice fish don't have a swim bladder and why they have such low levels of hemoglobin. They do also produce glycerol proteins in their bodies, the same glycerol proteins that springtails on land produce to avoid freezing through the Antarctic winter. And glycerols are like what you find in antifreeze. They are basically antifreeze proteins. You also have this larger species, the Antarctic toothfish, which definitely brings to mind, like when you just see pictures of deep sea fish with upward facing eyes, large upward facing eyes to help them see more. But yeah, it definitely doesn't look like it's super happy here. They also produce glycoproteins, and they also don't have a swim bladder. They live in the deep waters of Antarctica. They are not actually related to the toothfish that closely, and the same way that penguins and ostriches lost flight separately, it seems that Antarctic toothfish and ice fish have both separately evolved glycoproteins and evolved to lose their swim bladder. They live a very long time. They have a very slow heartbeat, and that may be linked to their slow growth rate. That is a problem because they are starting to become overfished. They have a related species known as the Patagonian toothfish, which does not have the antifreeze proteins and lives in waters a bit to the north. And the Patagonian toothfish is starting to be overfished, meaning that their population is declining because people are taking too many of them. And so Antarctic toothfish are starting to be fished in their place. And since Antarctic toothfish live so long, they are at risk of being depopulated if people take too many of them. There's a chance that they won't be able to reproduce fast enough for their population to rebound. Moving on from fish to the land vertebrates that have successfully adapted to largely live in the ocean. Some of those include the descendants of dinosaurs, some of the living dinosaurs, in fact. Penguins, whose ancestors lived with the last land mammals of Antarctica, and whose lineage may go as far back as the Cretaceous, when you actually had non-avian dinosaurs living in Antarctica, are some of the only truly marine birds. And even though penguins have to breed on land, they still have to lay an egg that cannot be in the water. They feed, play, and spend most of their time in the ocean, and they are adapted to be good swimmers. They are not particularly gainly on land in general. They have adapted a number of features that keep the water off their bodies and let them swim fast, but as a consequence, their bodies are not particularly well adapted to living on land, which is why they sort of waddle around awkwardly when they're on land, because they're not really land creatures at all. Antarctica also has flying seabirds. The penguins don't fly, but we do also have some flying seabirds in Antarctica that feed on fish in the surrounding waters, and many of them migrate to Antarctica to take advantage of the productivity boom. And the most prominent group of flying birds in Antarctica is probably the Prosolariforms, which is the group that includes petrels, and those are albatrosses, skuas, and many of the seabirds that are known for being especially large and for flying long distances. And the key thing is that none of these birds spend very much time on the Antarctic mainland at all. And even those that do spend any time on the mainland, which is, as we'll find out, a bare handful of them, they only go on land to lay eggs. So there's a number of different types of penguins. Penguins are not just found in Antarctica, but a number of the species do live in Antarctica. The emperor, Adelie, Chinstrap, Gentoo, and Macaroni penguins all live and breed in Antarctica. You have two more species, the king and the royal penguin, that only live and breed in the subantarctic islands, like South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. You also have penguins in South America, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. They almost all live in the southern hemisphere. A single species, the Galapagos penguin, lives in the northern hemisphere near the Galapagos Islands. And penguins are generally cold weather birds. They are not well adapted to hot weather. The water around the Galapagos is colder than you would expect given how equatorial they are, because you get a cool surface water current called the Humboldt current bringing cold water to there. So that's a good demonstration again of how surface currents reaching certain areas can affect their climate. The Galapagos have cold water currents reaching them, and that is part of what allows the Galapagos penguin to live there. Now, in Antarctica, penguins have adopted a number, well, they've developed a number of adaptations to handle the cold. For one thing, if you look at the size of the penguins that actually are most famous for breeding on the mainland, or the emperor penguins, they are the largest. They are the largest penguin by far. Not as large as the extinct penguins that I showed you in the last lecture, but still quite large. And polar animals are often large. Now, a large penguin is going to have more mass than a small penguin, and it's also going to have more surface area. But the ratio between the surface area and the mass is key. Surface area is important because animals, like us, lose heat through our skin. If we're in a cold area, then the more skin that is exposed, the more heat we lose. Now, it turns out that as the size of an animal increases, the surface area increases at a smaller rate. Larger animals actually have a smaller size to surface area ratio than do smaller animals. And this is why many polar animals are so large. The largest bear is, in fact, the polar bear of the Arctic. And you also have musk oxen, which are especially large oxen, living in the North Polar areas also. Getting larger is actually a payoff because, especially if you're warm-blooded, it's a payoff because you have less surface area relative to your mass than you did when you were small. And so that ultimately reduces the chance that you are going to lose heat through your skin. And that's why the penguins that actually breed on the mainland are so large. Now, the feathers are also important because the feathers are short and streamlined, which helps penguins swim rapidly and also helps repel wind and seawater. And then they'll have an underlayer of fine downy feathers that aren't touched by the water generally, and that helps insulate them. Penguins have a couple of different layers of insulation. They not only have the downy feathers under their outer streamlined feathers, but they also have what is known as subcutaneous fat, which is when you have a layer of fat under the skin. And penguins basically have extra fat under their skin to provide a layer of insulation, an extra layer of insulation between them and the cold Antarctic Sea, as well as the Antarctic winds. Penguins, in addition to changing their bodies to deal with the cold, have also adopted behavior that is designed to reduce the amount of time they spend in contact with the ice. Penguins stand on a tripod usually. They can't easily stand on the tiptoes of their webbed feet. And why would they want to stand on their tiptoes? Well, think about Halley Station, the station that was built on stilts. The less contact you have with the ice, the less heat you're going to lose through the ice. And you would want to stand on your tiptoes. Penguins have webbed feet and can't easily do that, but they have very stiff tail feathers. And what they'll do is they'll rock back and forth. And that's why you see penguins sort of rocking back and forth as they're standing in place. They'll hold their toes up, and they'll go between leaning on their toes to leaning back on their stiff tail feathers. Their tail functions as a third leg, essentially. They have stiff tail feathers at the end of their tail that don't have any blood flow and thus can't really feel the cold, and they will lean back on those for part of the time. And so the tripod stance is formed from the 2 points on their legs and the 1 point on their tail. And this helps them actually stay warm, as does the fact that penguins huddle. To keep warm, the penguins inside of the group will stay warmest, and the adults will alternate so that no single penguin has to stay on the edge for all of the time. If you have a bunch of penguins shoved together, penguins are warm-blooded. The penguins in the middle will produce body heat and stay pretty warm. The penguins on the outside will be a bit colder, but then they'll switch position and alternate so that no single penguin has to stay exposed to the cold for super long. Now, of the types of penguins that live in Antarctica itself, the Adelie penguins largely synchronize their life schedule to the ice. The Adelie penguin breeds all over Antarctica and has several locations in the Antarctic Peninsula as well as out on the ice. They don't really breed on the mainland itself as much as on the ice. And they will feed at the start of the summer and then migrate to their breeding grounds in October, where they nest and rear either 1 or 2 eggs for about 3 months. In February, they migrate again to feed, and they take advantage of the last burst of Antarctic summer productivity. And then in the winter, they migrate away from Antarctica. Their life cycle and habits are very heavily dependent on the extent of sea ice. They largely eat krill and fish. They are fed upon by leopard seals, killer whales, as well as petrels, the flying seabirds like the albatrosses and skuas that mostly go after their chicks. Penguin chicks are little and can't really swim very well and are going to be the most vulnerable to predators. And the population of Adelie penguins is very dependent on the distribution of sea ice. And if patterns in the seasonal formation and disappearance of sea ice change, that has the potential to affect the population of Adelie penguins. The largest penguin is the emperor penguins, and they have colonies where they breed on Ross Island as well as on the Antarctic mainland. And their life cycle is also highly synchronized, but they actually breed in the winter, unlike the Adelie penguin. Their large size is largely an adaptation to the cold. Why would they want to breed during the winter? Well, there's not much food available for them then, and so they basically head inland to stay away from predators and deal with the cold in, as the movie March of the Penguin shows, in rather dramatic fashion. They deal with the cold and take advantage of having a place away from predators to rear their babies, even though it's extremely inhospitable. The large size, huddling behavior, and subcutaneous fat all help to keep them alive during the cold winter. And the parents will take long shifts between guarding the babies. They will spend January through March feeding when the ocean productivity is high. They will then march hundreds of kilometers to their rookeries far inland. And they go inland to avoid leopard seals and orcas. In the winter, there's not really much food available for them in the water. There's still going to be leopard seals and orcas around, and so they go inland to rear their babies away where the orcas and leopard seals can't reach them. Once they get to their inland rookeries, they will mate and lay their eggs, and the mother penguins will actually hand their eggs over to the male penguins for safekeeping, and then the female penguins will go back to the ocean to feed for a bit. The males will stay behind and incubate the eggs through the dark, windy Antarctic winter, which is shown in a later part of March of the Penguins than I assigned. You are welcome to watch more of that. It does a nice job of showing the full extent of their life cycle. Eventually, the female penguins will come back, and they will have food in their bellies that they regurgitate or throw up to feed the babies. And that is actually an important adaptation because the mother penguins are able to store food and then bring it back to an area inland where there isn't any food. Then when the babies hatch in August, the female penguins will take the babies again, while the male penguins will go back to the ocean to feed. And they will switch positions a few times, doing this until October, when the older chicks will start to huddle in groups and become a bit more independent and stop staying with their parents quite so much. And it's pretty remarkable that penguins can do this. They've evolved a pouch that they use to keep the eggs and chicks warm. They'll have the egg balanced on their feet and under the pouch. The hardest part by far is when they have to transfer the egg. The March of the Penguins documentary shows a couple of times when a mated pair makes a mistake and drops the egg on the ice, and the egg being in contact with the ice is pretty much the end of that egg. The key part of this operation is keeping the egg on either one of the penguin's legs and under the pouch, and not ever in contact with the ice. And it's kind of remarkable that penguins have evolved this cycle. It's a big operation. Ultimately, it serves the purpose of letting them breed somewhere where there aren't going to be any predators, because there just aren't any land predators in Antarctica. As for the other penguins in Antarctica, they largely breed in the subantarctic islands. They'll feed in Antarctica during the productive summer and then get the heck away from Antarctica during the winter. Gentoo penguins, for example, these guys up here, largely they need to breed on ice-free surfaces, and they often form nests on tufts of grass, sometimes in the peninsula, but also on the subantarctic islands. So emperor penguins, remember, don't really form nests, and Adelie penguins just sort of lay their eggs. Just both emperor and Adelie penguins keep their eggs warm themselves on the ice. But Gentoo penguins need to make a nest on an ice-free surface. So you'll find their colonies in South Georgia and Kerguelen, as opposed to the main Antarctic continent itself. Chinstrap penguins, these ones with this cool little black strip below their face, will build their nests out of stones on the same islands. They are apparently really aggressive. They are known to attack people and other penguins. The one with the colorful feathers is the Macaroni Penguin, and it may serve a mating purpose. A lot of the time, male birds will have crests or colorful features to attract female birds, but female Macaroni penguins have these tufts too, so it's not completely clear why they have them. They are not the only crested penguins, though. You have the royal penguin and a number of others that have this. Strangely, Macaroni penguins they'll usually lay 2 eggs, but only one of them will survive, and it's not well known why they do this either. They're named Macaroni penguins not after the pasta, but after the macaron style of men's shirt, like these really frilly shirts that aristocratic men wore during Enlightenment era Palace of Versailles. So that's just kind of amusing to me, honestly. Now, as for the flying birds in Antarctica, we have the petrels, and they are pretty magnificent. The petrels are a group of large seabirds known for migrating long distances, especially the albatrosses. And the albatrosses will feed on fish in the Antarctic waters and then breed on the subantarctic islands or sometimes the peninsula. And they fly a long way. Scientists have documented individual albatrosses as circumnavigating the entire Southern Ocean 3 times during the span of a single year, and they can travel a long way. One of the relatives of albatrosses, the Scua, survives by hunting baby seals and penguins, as well as by scavenging. This is the Scua here, this brown one on the lower right. They nest on Ross Island, as well as the subantarctic islands, and I saw some of them nesting while I was at McMurdo. They are infamous for stealing human garbage from bases and from snatching food out of people's hands. They actually use the term Scua as the name for the lost and found at McMurdo, because it's like, look where the Scuas dumped all the stolen stuff. So it's just kind of a funny little joke there. They have even been spotted as far south as the geographic South Pole, and that is most likely because they have realized that humans are there and they are looking for human food. I saw one while I was out in the dry valleys. I had not seen a bird or another living animal outside of my field mates for several months, and it took me a moment to realize that's a bird. They can fly a long distance, and they are often looking to see what humans are doing. Now, turning to the marine mammals, we don't have any land mammals surviving in Antarctica today, but marine mammals have fared quite well. And one of the groups is the pinnipeds, the group that includes the seals and the sea lions, as well as the walrus, which lives in the Arctic but not the Antarctic. And the true seals are those pinnipeds that cannot swing their hind or back flippers forward so that they can walk on land. They also don't have any visible ear flaps. Harbor seals and Antarctic crab-eater seals, elephant seals, leopard seals, and most of the Antarctic pinnipeds are part of the true seals. The one exception to this is the Antarctic Fur Seal, which is not actually a true seal, but more closely related to California sea lions. And you'll notice that this Antarctic Fur Seal, its hind flippers are flipped forward so that it can walk a little more easily on land, and they also have an ear flap. And as we'll find out later, the Antarctic Fur Seal was heavily hunted for its fur by hunters in the 19th century, almost to the point of extinction. One thing I want to mention is that there is actually a chance for extra credit that involves looking at some seals. For those of you looking to do extra credit via the geology hike option, there is a good place to see breeding harbor seals in Carpinteria if you happen to be in or near Santa Barbara. You can also see some neat geology there. These are layers of sedimentary rock that have been tilted and then eroded back down. And I have some reference material on the geology at the Carpinteria Bluffs if you want to talk a little bit about the geology in a hypothetical extra credit write-up, in addition to writing about the seals. And the harbor seals pull up on the beach to raise their babies. Seals do not give birth in the water. They like having this sheltered beach that is relatively free of predators and humans, and it's now protected from humans during the breeding season. They will not be there much longer. The last of them tend to leave around May, so if you're interested in doing this, I would recommend doing it relatively soon. Seals have a lot of interesting adaptations to living in the water. In Antarctica, they can dive an extremely long way to hunt for food and remain under the ice for a really long time. They actually use echolocation, which is the same type of sonar that bats use to detect where the rock is or detect how deep they are. They also have fantastic eyesight. The reason seals have such big beady eyes is to help them see better underwater. And Weddell seals in particular are documented to spend a lot of time underwater. They can actually become negatively buoyant by constricting their capillaries, the little blood vessels sort of at their extremities. Meanwhile, once they're underwater, they can actually collapse their lungs to help keep them down, and they'll instead store the oxygen in their muscles. They also have a lot of hemoglobin in their blood. You don't want to confuse this with the fact that ice fish don't have a lot of hemoglobin. Seals have a lot of hemoglobin, and this helps them basically have an oxygen tank in their body. This helps them store more oxygen and stay under the ice for longer. They also use the Earth's magnetic field. They use the magnetic field to figure out where they are under the ice and know where the holes that they'll surface at are. And this is one reason why that when they've put a tracker on a single seal and during different seasons they've measured the seal's movement under the ice, it's a pretty similar range because they're going to a lot of the same weak points in the ice to breathe in. Another weird side effect of this is that if you remember the seal mummies, the hypothesis is that they wandered up onto land because of a misunderstanding of Earth's magnetic field. They may have been juvenile seals who didn't have a fully developed magnetic compass and got lost, even though all reason would tell them not to go up onto the land where there's no food. And again, that might be something that happens more during shifts in Earth's magnetic field. One of the more interesting types of seals you find is the crab-eater seal, which has specially developed teeth to filter water. Most seals have sharp teeth that are adapted to catching fish or squid, but crab-eater seals, they do sometimes eat fish, but they're most famous for using their teeth as a sieve. They've developed little extensions on their teeth that help it serrate and help stuff get caught in here. And they suck out seawater and then flush out the seawater, but close their mouth just enough so that the krill stay stuck behind. And so crab-eater seals function more like a primary carnivore, eating the krill, than a secondary carnivore, as most other seals do. Most other seals feed on fish that feed on the krill, but crab-eater seals have especially developed an adaptation to feed directly on the krill because there's so much of it in Antarctica. They're getting closer to the energy source in a sense. Now, as for some other seals, the top predator among them by far is the leopard seal, which is famous for attacking just about anything, including human divers. There aren't many documented fatalities from humans. There aren't any fatalities from leopard seals attacking people, but you don't want to screw around with them. They actually do sometimes eat krill, but they're more famous for eating penguins and for attacking other seals, including crab-eater seals, and attacking various fish. They are also one of the largest seals. They are 10 feet long and 750 pounds. And they are, again, one of the big reasons why emperor penguins breed inland. They're trying to raise their babies somewhere where the leopard seals won't bother them. And the interesting thing is that the largest animals in the Antarctic waters aren't necessarily the top predators. The other group of marine mammals found in Antarctica is the whales. And whales consist of two groups that branched from the same ancestor years ago. The group, the Odontoceti, and you'll notice dont or dent, which means tooth in there. The Odontoceti are the whales that still have teeth, or the toothed whales, and that includes dolphins as well as the orca. And the beaked whales, and sperm whales, and the beaked whales, which are these mysterious deep sea whales that are very poorly studied. The other group is the baleen whales, and in baleen whales, the teeth have been replaced by baleen. And baleen is this fibrous material that is actually made of keratin, which is the same substance that makes up our hair and fingernails. Baleen whales basically have hair growing in their mouths. And why do they do this? It seems pretty darn weird, but it is actually a very cool adaptation to help them filter krill. They use it as a comb or sieve to swallow a mouthful of seawater that has krill in it, and then they expel the seawater after closing their mouth, and the krill get trapped inside. Meanwhile, the toothed whales will usually eat fish or squid instead, but the orca will attack almost anything. And the baleen whales include most of the largest whales, like the blue whale, the minke whale, the humpback whale, and the sei whale. And they swallow a patch of seawater in which they observe krill swimming. They will close their mouth and expel the water through the baleen. The water will make it out, but the krill will get stuck. And pretty much all baleen whales get their nutrition this way. Again, the relatively little, they're larger, so compared to smaller whales, they have a low surface area to body size ratio. So they can sustain themselves off of eating large amounts of krill and not much else. And baleen whales often migrate to and from Antarctica, including the humpback whales, because they will go there to feed on krill during the summer productivity boom, and then they will leave to raise their babies in more temperate latitudes. The one prominent Antarctic whale that does have teeth is the orca, which is closely related to dolphins. And the orcas are active predators. They will attack fish, they will attack penguins, they will attack leopard seals. They are the only known predator of leopard seals, in fact. And they are known as the killer whale because they hunt so many different animals. They don't seem to attack humans very often, which is good, but I still view them as an animal that you don't really want to screw around with. There aren't going to be many of them in a given area because one orca needs a lot of food to survive. Again, the higher up the food web you are, the farther you are from the energy source, and the less effective the energy is being transferred. Orcas use blubber to stay warm. In fact, most of these swimming marine mammals and birds use subcutaneous fat in some method or another to stay warm. That's one reason why orcas can simply swim in the water without a wetsuit, whereas we need wetsuits. We need specially designed wetsuits to stay warm in the water. Orcas have a built-in wetsuit in the form of the blubber under their skin. And ending on that note, that is the last of the new lecture material for the first half of the class. So lecture 9 on Monday will be a review lecture. The study guide is up. There's also a short practice quiz up. Good luck studying, and I will see you on Monday to go over a review of all the material.